Hi everyone, welcome to physics. This is Miss Grunucci here. I'm excited to start the school year with you. I have lots of fun things planned, but first and foremost is safety. So what I want to do in this video is give you a little idea about safety in physics. My safety protocols are different from chemistry because we're not using chemicals. So there are things I need you to be aware of, and of course safety is first. So what I'm going to do in this video is talk a little bit about what to expect in physics, especially lab. So I broke this down into parts just so you can do this at your own pace, but you are required to watch these videos for your safety. The first part is going to be lab expectations. That's going to be a bit, this is included in this video, which would be about 15 minutes. The next video will be another 15-minute video talking about lab precautions, so what to look out for in physics labs specifically. And then part 3 and 4 will be together, another 15-minute video roughly. I'm going to locate all of the safety features in this classroom so you're aware of the situation and talk about our roles together as partnerships, and if anything happens in the lab, what are the consequences for that. So let's begin. Part 1. General lab expectations. So like I said already, physics lab is different than chemistry because we're not using chemicals. One big proponent is motion, so we're actually going to be studying a lot of things that move. So generally our labs are going to be, like I said, motion labs. But before I even go into the precautions of labs, I just want to go over some lab guidelines. This is applicable for all labs that we're going to be doing for the school year. I'd like to follow this protocol. This again is for our safety. So first of all, I will always introduce the lab. There's never a day where you're going to say, oh, why, it's a lab today. Now, I can't account for your forgetfulness, but as your instructor, I will absolutely and almost always announce your labs, so you'll know in advance when your lab will occur. I'm pretty organized, or at least I'd like to think so, so you should already have an idea of when that lab will be with a whole unit plan. I'll try to give you those so you can be aware of it as well. But anyway, along with the lab announcement, you'll have a lab handout, which you're required to read for your safety. Labs can be very daunting in reading. I know for a fact that when I do any new lab, especially when I'm teaching those labs, it takes me 3 times to read it. So if you find that you don't understand it the first time around, that's pretty accurate. I don't ever understand a lab the first time I read it. So reread the lab several times for understanding. I will try to make lab instructional videos to help condense some of that reading and point out some necessary things specific to our labs. I will not have a lab video for every lab, but if there is one, you are required to watch it, of course, both for information and for your safety. I will let you know if there's any sort of specific safety protocols that need to be followed during the lab, and I'll point out any special dress codes that you may need for that. And of course, if any pre-labs are assigned, please do them. Again, not only is it for your information, but it is for your understanding and awareness of the lab. So once again, your safety, always important. So what do I expect? I do expect that the lab is read. That if you have questions, list them out and bring them to class the next day or send an email. By all means, I know that even reading it 3 times, you may still have questions. That's totally natural and fine, but please be ready to have those questions ready to go. I expect that the labs that do have videos are watched. I do expect that you understand what you're getting into in terms of the lab precautions. I'll go into more detail in the next section, but for example, if you're doing a ramp lab, you are aware that there is a cart on that lab and that you have to put the lab on a ring stand. And that the ring stand needs to be clamped so that when you get to lab, you're not surprised by this. Or if you see the lab set up already and it's not clamped, you ask the question, why isn't this clamped? Once again, this is for your knowledge, for your safety, and it expedites lab. Your understanding coming into the lab makes the lab time be used much more efficiently. And of course, being prepared for the lab. So, on lab day, when they're announced, what I'd like you to do, well, first and foremost, before I even do that, is no food or drink in the lab room. You know this already. You've been here for 3-4 years. This is not an unexpected rule, but it is a rule that is very strictly reinforced. This, again, is for your safety. Although I do not use chemicals in my lab, Other classes are in here that do use chemicals, and quite frankly, I don't know what they use. So by putting your water bottle on the tables, it could be contamination. I personally never put anything food related, drink related on the lab tables ever, because I don't want to also get contaminated. It's true. I've heard a story where a teacher have actually contaminated themselves just by breaking one of their own rules. I will follow my own rules as well. If you'll notice in the morning, I usually am hungry, so I usually will eat my cheese stick or my granola bar outside the room. So please, again, this is not because it's for your, because we don't want you to eat or drink, it's just for your safety. I know that you may forget to do this. You might walk into the room with a water bottle. If you walk into the room, I'll try to immediately remind you to put it outside the room. If you walk into the room and you place it in the back of the room, that's an immediate detention. I'm not doing this to be mean, but you're clearly violating the rule. You understand the consequences, and by putting the water in the back of the room, it's not helpful because in the back of the room can also be contaminated as well. So I will give you one warning, however, if you walk in the room with your water bottle, because I know you forget. You come from English, you come from a different classroom. I understand that. So I will give you one warning. But after that, it's detentions, because I can't keep warning you. You have to be aware, and you have to be on top of this. This is a very serious condition for this classroom. So no food or drink. You may leave it outside the room, that's fine with me. Please remember to bring it, take it at the end of the class. So back to where I was getting to, which is, what to do with your, what to do when you enter the room. So the first thing I'd like you to do is actually, when you enter the room, is put your stuff in the front of the room. So you'll notice on my PowerPoint slide, I took a picture of the front of the room. Put your backpack there, and everything else. You really don't need anything other than the supplies that I announced. And generally, the supplies you'll need is your lab handout, your notebook, your calculator, something to write with, and anything else that I asked you to bring to your lab that day. Please do not bring anything else to the lab bench. Labs are very, the space in here is very tight, and anything extra is just hazard for tripping, for clutter. Just get rid of it just to keep us all safe. This also is true about things underneath the table. Please don't put your backpacks underneath the table. I know it's very convenient to have it there, but if you're moving around the lab bench and you trip, well, I don't want you to trip. That's the idea, of course. So this is, again, for your safety. So just leave everything in the front of the room. And I expect that during lab that your lab table is clear. Generally, you're going to have your laptops there, so I might ask you to do that too. Obviously, if there's anything that I instruct, go with that. But please be aware of your surroundings. If you find that there is a backpack on the floor, please do me a favor, help me out. Ask that student, your friend, whoever it is, hey, can you just put that into the front of the room? It's a big help for everybody. And then, as always, report anything unusual. If you find that, somebody else left their backpack, they shouldn't, but let's say another class, or there's something there that shouldn't be there, please let me know. If there's lab equipment, if there's somebody's belongings, if there's food or drink, God forbid, that, there's something there, please just, let me know, so that I can handle that. Okay, so before lab, after you enter into the lab room, if there's a daily problem on the board, please complete it. You'll know what those are soon enough. If there are, make sure you have everything with you and wait for instructions. Please do not touch the lab. Please do not use the equipment unless I instruct you to immediately do so, etc. This, of course, once again, is for your safety. If the lab is set up and you've given instructions, go ahead and begin the lab and do anything that you need to do as instructed. If you have any questions, just let me know. Please be aware that there is one of me and there's 6 lab groups. So if you find that I'm, with another group, please just be patient. It's not because I'm ignoring you. It's because I have a pretty heavy job, which is to not only monitor everybody, but answer everybody's questions. So I do know that sometimes it's frustrating if I'm working with one group. But just be patient. Sometimes I'm going to actually ask you to set up your own labs. If that's the case, please use the equipment as intended. I will give you training on anything that you need to use, so of course you'll know how to use it and what it's intended for. So obviously, this is a silly example, but don't use a ruler as a sword, for example. That's no-no. So that's what I mean by equipment as intended. Don't do your own unauthorized experiments. Don't set it up your own way. Especially in circuit labs, you get very curious. You want to put 3 batteries in instead of 2. You want to put 4 light bulbs instead of 3. Generally, I will allow you to do that if you ask for my permission first. So don't just do it on your own. I need to know what you're doing is always safe. So just be aware. And also, if you don't use it the way it's intended, you can actually break my equipment. So just, again, always be cognizant of that. So when you do your labs, you're going to have lots of wires around. Make sure that all the wires are out of the way for tripping hazards, and secure all things. There's times in lab that I ask you to clamp things to the table, so obviously they don't fall or cause injury to anybody else, so please be aware of that. And lastly, be aware of your surroundings. It's just such a big and an important rule here. What you'll notice in lab is, like I said, I'm being repetitive, but it's for a purpose, is that it gets kind of crowded in our room. So if you're, I'm going to actually ask you to stand in a certain area so you're not standing back to back to another person. Please obviously keep at that area so you don't cause, you don't bump into somebody. As you might imagine, if you bump into somebody, you might cause them to push something unintentionally, which can cause an injury to happen. I'll tell you a true story. Several years ago when I was working in the physics lab at Southern, I had a student who wasn't aware of her surroundings and actually bumped into the table, knocking a case of boiling water onto another student. An accident, but an accident that was very dangerous and actually caused injury to that student. Of course, luckily she was okay, but if you imagine, you wouldn't want boiling water knocked onto you. So when I say be aware of your surroundings, that's what I mean. Look out for everybody. Look out for equipment. Make sure you know where things are so that you don't cause any injury to anybody else. So my expectations during lab is that everyone participates. That's for everything, for lab setup, for data collection, observations, calculations, and cleanup. So obviously if the lab's set up already, obviously you don't need to set it up again. But the data collection part is actually incredibly important. A lot of times students will, one person will collect the data and they say, oh, I'll give you the data later. And then, of course, the student's out sick or goes on vacation, and then all of a sudden the whole group doesn't have any lab data. So we're going to purposely not have that happen by making sure that everybody collects data. So what I mean by that is that at the end of lab, during that period, it is expected that all students have a copy of that data. I will not accept my lab partner has all the data as an excuse for why your lab is not done. It's not going to be accepted. I do understand and know that there are labs in physics where 3 people have 3 separate jobs, maybe timing, pushing, somebody else is pushing, and somebody else is doing something else. So yes, you can't take data during that time. I completely, 100% understand that. But as soon as the lab collection is done, everybody gets the data afterward. That there's no exception to that. So everyone must have collected their lab data. Also, another thing that I notice in lab is calculations. Usually what happens is, everyone's doing the lab and someone's like, oh, I'll clean up while you do the calculations. I don't want you to do that. One person shouldn't do all the calculations. There are 2 things wrong with this. The first thing wrong with this is the fact that the student that's not doing the calculation is not getting experience using the equations in the course, which of course is necessary for learning. So you're automatically at a disadvantage if you don't use those equations. Secondly, a really important thing is that you're putting all the pressure on this one student, and also to do it correctly. 90% of the time they do it correctly, but every once in a while someone might make a mistake. So the value of everybody doing the calculations, even together, is to make sure that you get the same number in the end. And if you don't get the same number, it's a great way to catch your error right away. It's really helpful. So there's a reason why I do want you to do calculations as well. And I know some of you are not strong in mathematics, and you're a little scared of the calculations. You may always ask for help. I will always help you with mathematics in this course, or your partner. But you must do the calculation. It's absolutely for your benefit. So, the second bullet, you can see that everyone must be taking data. Everyone has to be participating. If there's a noticeable act that the student is not participating, I will let the student know that their grade will be influenced by their lack of participation. So it won't be a surprise on the lab, but I'll tell them. And I'll try to give you a warning if that's the case. If I see you working on something else or working on your English or whatever the subject is, I'll give you a warning that is not accepted, although, trust me, that's not accepted in this course. But if it's continued, it will be a penalty onto your lab grade. I kind of already talked about the next bullet point, and because of that, I'm just going to say briefly, just once again, just be aware of things. Look around before you get up and move around. Be aware of extra wires, moving objects, falling objects, projectile objects, whatever is going on. And always ask questions if you're unsure. I'd rather you ask a million questions than to try to plow through something and try to figure things out on your own when I can just answer those questions. You may ask your partners or other lab partners questions too. That's totally fine, but just as always ask questions. So after the lab, this is what I expect. So as soon as you're done with your lab, I do expect you to clean it up. It's a huge help for me, and it's your responsibility as the lab. I would generally try to get the labs set up, but if not, I also ask for your help with that. So everything will be labeled in the room, so you should know exactly where your lab equipment should go. So you should put it back. If there's any wires, please coil them back up and put them nice and neatly. Clean up your table. A lot of times people might leave extra paper or extra handouts. If you could just do me a favor and help by cleaning out the table, that would be great. All the lab tables should be clean, and that means clean in terms of nothing on it, not extra papers, torn out papers, extra pencils. Please pick up after yourself. If your lab group becomes a problem, I will talk to you about it, and if no resolution comes, I will deduct points off your lab grade. And again, I'm not trying to be mean with this, I just need your help. After the lab is done and the lab is put away, you may grab your laptops or whatever you need, and I expect you to continue working on the lab. That includes looking at your data to make sure that it's okay, checking all the information with your lab partners, discussing the questions as a group. The questions are usually some deep questions involving the lab, and it's great to sit there and talk about it as a group. This is the time to do that. You're required to answer lab questions in class, not later after you get home. And if you finish the lab, please turn it in to notify me that it is done and that there is nothing else left to do on it. So what I don't want you to do after lab is to go in the front of the room and grab all your belongings and pack up and sit there ready to go. There's two things wrong with that. One, bringing all your stuff is a hazard to the lab for other people. Now you may be done, but other people may be working, so your belongings must stay in the front of the room pretty much until the bell, or unless I instruct you to go back and get them. Second, you're wasting time that could be used in class to work on your lab. I will be, again, repetitive, is that when you do your lab, I do expect you to do it in class. That includes questions as well. These are all obvious, but I want you to know that that I do not want you to do this because, again, I want you to work on your lab, but have non-related conversations. What you're wearing to prom, I don't want you to talk about that. Sit and wait for the bell, work on other assignments, check your emails, go on your phone. These are all things I don't want you to do after lab. And in fact, generally what I'll do is if everyone is done with the lab, as a group we'll discuss the lab because I want to help you understand the lab, and the best way to understand is communicate. So talking about it with your group, looking at your data, etc. like that. So please, 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 after lab, unless otherwise instructed so, you're required to work on the lab the entire lab duration. You may bring your laptop to the lab bench, but must leave all your other stuff, including your, well, you shouldn't have backpacks, but you know what I mean, other books. Please, you know, put your other books in the front of the room and everything else if you need to work on your lab. Okay, this concludes part 1. In the next section, I'll talk about lab procedures.